Good Thursday, everyone, and welcome into today's daily Bible reading for November the 3rd. Today we are beginning the closing remarks of Job in the writing that bears his name. He has had his discussions with his three friends, Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar, and he has responded to those. He has shared with us in chapter 28 his hymn to wisdom, acknowledging, as we looked at yesterday, that God is alone, is the one who has wisdom, who possesses wisdom, who gives wisdom. And if any human wanted to truly be wise and to be able to make correct judgments in any way, then they needed to rely upon what God would give them. Obviously, I think Job is saying that because he recognizes that his friends are not speaking according to the wisdom of God. And thus, I believe he gives that particular hymn to wisdom. Here, beginning in chapter 29, though, we're going to see the real closing statements of Job, the closing arguments. It's 3 chapters. The first chapter talks about the good of Job's life, kind of, I guess, almost his past life, probably. The way he describes his life within this text probably seems like an entire lifetime away from where he currently is. Then in chapter 30, he talks about the difficulties that he's enduring right now. And then chapter 31, he begins to really reason and say, what changed? What changed from my life in chapter 29 to my life that I describe in chapter 30? And he gives a lot of ifs. I'm going to go through and count how many ifs there are within this particular chapter. And he's just saying, well, if I have done these things, then bad things should happen to me. But that's if. And again, the idea behind it is I've not done these things. And eventually he's going to end in chapter 31, really demanding very strongly an audience with Yahweh to be able to argue his case and be able to understand exactly what is going on. And then Elihu is going to pipe up and think that he has to stand up and defend God. And he shares really a lot of rehashing of what has been said by Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar, but also introducing some new material as well from his perspective. It almost seems as if he has just kind of been an observer from afar, and now he's stepping up to participate in this discussion. But we'll get there in a few days. Right now, we are looking at Job chapter 29. Let's read this text together. And Job, I believe, here is going to describe within his mind the good old days, the good life that he used to live, what that looked like. We'll begin reading here in Job 29 and verse number 1. Job 29, verse number 1, Job continued his discourse, saying, if only I could be as in months gone by, in the days when God watched over me, when his lamp shone above my head, and I walked through darkness by his lights. I would be as I was in the days of my youth, when God's friendship rested on my tent, when the Almighty was still with me, and my children were around me, when my feet was bathed in curds, and rock poured out streams of oil for me. When I was out to the city gate, and I took my seat in the town square, the young men saw me and withdrew, while older men stood to their feet. City officials stopped talking and covered their mouths with their hands. The noblemen's voices were hushed, and their tongues stuck to the roof of their mouths. When they heard me, they blessed me, and when they saw me, they spoke well of me. For I rescued the poor who cried out for help, and the fatherless child who had no one to support him. The dying blessed me, and I made the widow's heart rejoice. I clothed myself in righteousness, and it enveloped me. My just decisions were like a robe and a turban. I was eyes to the blind and feet to the lame. I was a father to the needy, and I examined the case of the stranger. I shattered the fangs of the unjust and snatched the prey from his teeth. So I thought, I will die in my own nest and multiply my days as the sand. My roots will have access to water, and the dew will rest on my branches all night. My whole being will be refreshed within me, and my bow will be renewed, my bow will be renewed in my hand. Men listen to me with expectation, waiting silently for my advice. After a word from me, they did not speak again. My speech settled on them like dew. They waited for me as for the rain, and opened their mouths as for spring showers. If I smiled at them, they couldn't believe it. They were thrilled at the light of my countenance. I directed their course and presided as chief. I lived as a king among his troops, like one who comforts those who mourn. And that is Job chapter 29. Again, I wrote down here a little note, just said that these were the good old days of Job. This is what his life seemed to be like whenever he's described in Job chapter 1 and verse number 1 as this man Job in the land of Uz, that he was a blameless and righteous man. This seemed to be the type of life that he lived, in which he was able to declare himself as a blameless and righteous man. He seems to be a man who, very much so, beginning of verse number 7, was a man who by his actions demanded respect. Anytime we see the city gate mentioned in the Old Testament, especially, that's a place of judgment, meaning that's where people would go to detail. It's basically the town government. The town government took place in the city gate. And Job was someone who was an important person in the city gate or in the town square. Whenever he stood, or excuse me, whenever he arrived, young men would go away to honor him. Older men would stand to honor him. City officials stopped talking. They would cover their mouths. The noblemen's voices were hushed. Their tongues stuck to the roof of their mouths as if they're almost nervous to be around someone so important. They heard me. They blessed me. When they saw me, they spoke well of me. Well, why would they do that? Why would they do such a thing? After all, didn't Eliphaz say that Bildad, or excuse me, didn't he say that Job was, kind of a bad guy? Didn't Eliphaz really go off on Job, telling him of all of the sins that he had committed? Let's see here. I'm back in chapter 22, where it talks about, Job, don't you know that your wickedness is abundant and your iniquities are endless, that you took collateral from your brothers without cause, you stripped off their clothes and left them naked, you didn't give water to the thirsty, you withheld food from the hungry, while the land belonged to a powerful man and an influential man lived on it. Again, I think he's referring to Job there. You sent widows away empty-handed. The strength of the fatherless was crushed. Well, I thought that's the type of man that Job was. Well, Job here answers those accusations. He answers these accusations by saying, no, that's not who I was at all. Instead, what I did is I rescued the poor who cried out, the fatherless child who had no one to support him. The dying blessed me. I made widows' hearts rejoice. I clothed myself in righteousness and it enveloped me. I want to stop right there. Remember our lesson recently on the topic of righteousness. What is righteousness? Well, righteousness is having a right relationship with God and with our fellow man, doing what is right by them, honoring them, respecting them, loving them. That's who Job was. Job says, I clothed myself in righteousness and it enveloped me. Here's another one. My just decisions. Remember, righteousness and justice are so often seen to be connected, and they certainly are here within this text from Job. My righteousness enveloped me like a piece of clothing, and my just decisions were like a robe and a turban. I was eyes to the blind, feet to the lame, father to the needy. I examined the case of the stranger, and I shattered the fangs of the unjust and snatched the prey from his teeth. Well, that sounds very different from the picture that was painted for us by Eliphaz, wasn't it? Absolutely, it was. Again, Eliphaz was just frustrated, it seems, and he was not speaking according to reality. He was not speaking according to truth. And Job really has something to say about that here, where he talks about how he was nothing like the way Eliphaz described him, that he was a good man. Again, he practiced righteousness, he lived by justice. So I thought, Job says, then, verse number 18, and apologize for not moving the text down. I thought then, I will die in my own nest and multiply my days as sand. Again, the thinking, it seems to have been the way that people thought was, again, God rules the world. They all acknowledged his sovereignty. They all acknowledged the fact that he did rule the world. And the way they thought he ruled the world is that he did so through strict justice. that good was going to be repaid with good, bad was going to be repaid with bad. So he's thinking, oh, well, things are going to go well. That my roots will have access to water, and the dew will rest on my branches all night, that my whole being will be refreshed within me, and my bow will be renewed in my hand. After all, look at all the evidence. Men listened to him with expectation. Later on, verse 24, if I smiled at them, they couldn't believe it. They were thrilled at the light of my countenance. I directed their course and presided as chief. As Job thinks here about the good old days of his life, I want to note that it all seems to be tied in to the type of man that he was. Because here's the reality. The way that he's described here, people don't do these things for jerks. People don't do these things for people who mistreat them or who practice injustice in the way that they carry themselves, or the way they might carry out a position of power. You don't do these things for that type of person. But for the person, as Job describes himself here, those things are true. That you do garner respect whenever people see your good, upstanding character. Job says, this is who I was. Oh man, how I long for those days. I long for those days, he says. Again, going back to the beginning of the chapter, if only I could be as in the months gone by, in the days when God watched over me. And again, he goes through here and describes that it's obvious that God was caring for him, and God was caring for him. Remember, go back to the beginning of the writing in Job chapter 1, whenever Yahweh specifically draws the Satan's attention to Job, and he says, "Oh, if you consider my servant Job, who's a good, upstanding, blameless man, full of integrity, turns away from evil." What does the Satan say? He says, well, he only does those things because you protect him. Here, Job is acknowledging the protection given to him by God. And rightfully so, that is true. So as we move into chapter 30 tomorrow, the question is, well, what changed? What changed? If you have your Bible there, if you look at the beginning of chapter 30, that all these good things have happened. Again, the highlight of them is verse 24 of chapter 29. If I smiled at them, they couldn't believe it. They were thrilled at the light of my countenance. They loved being around me. I was seen as valuable. I was seen as important. I was seen as someone who had influence, which I don't think Job's saying any of these things to be arrogant. It's just the reality of a situation. And again, these things were true because of the person that he was. Nevertheless, but now, chapter 30, but now they mock me. Something changed. Job's status in life, his condition, his situation is different. And he's going to work through that here in chapter 30. He's going to talk about everything really that's wrong in his life now, how everything's bad. And one of the things I think that reading this opens our eyes to is, at least for me, whenever I think about Job, I think about him just living out in the middle of nowhere, just kind of doing his own thing with his family. But here it's very obvious that there were communities, there were cities and towns, and Job was the type of guy who participated in those things. So prior to all the bad things happening, he was a respected member of society. Well, now as we transition to chapter 30, we're going to see that now he's kind of an outcast. He's kind of a pariah. Nobody cares for him. Everybody kind of gives him the side eye and walks on the other way of the street if he were to walk through town. He's going to talk about that in chapter 30, and then again, chapter 31, he's going to say why. The question really is going to be why. Why did this happen? And he's going to talk about his integrity. And then beginning in verse number 5, he begins to lay out these if statements. Well, if this has happened, if I've done these bad things, then yes, God punish me. But at the end, he's going to say, but I haven't done those things. So why? Why has this happened? We're going to be looking at that over the next couple of days. I do appreciate you tuning into this reading today, and I hope that in every way that you are blessed today, that God is with you, and that you are living for him. I know we got a lot of sickness in the church right now, and that just really stinks. I hate it for everyone. I hate that those who are not feeling well, that are under the weather and suffering various symptoms, various ways. I'm praying for you, and I hope that we are all praying for one another. We certainly missed you last night, but we hope that a lot of people will be able to make a good recovery to be back together on Sunday as we come together to worship the Lord together as a church family here in Loudon. If I can help you in any way, please reach out and let me know. We'll see what we can do to assist one another in our times of struggle with, again, the various kinds of sicknesses that are going around. Again, thanks for tuning in. We'll be back at it again tomorrow. Look forward to reading with you then. Take care and God bless.